It's obviously a very abbreviated menu that Carlos Perez de Castillo was able to give in that time. But from what you know of the centers and of the transformations that they're taking on, how could this effort be made even stronger and even more relevant towards nutrition, et cetera, through different collaboration with the private sector? Because you've certainly, through many organizations, worked on how to bring more private sector impetus to development and to solving a number of issues in agriculture.
Thanks. Is this working? Thanks, and I appreciate the 5 minutes warning of the question. Let me say that I really think that it starts obviously with the seed. And we have seen that certainly our own company and many others see the potential to be engaging with the centers to go beyond what the private sector tends to focus on initially, which is productivity, to start looking at nutrition enhancement, environmental resilience, and even taste. And we know that the science is allowing us to do that. I think that it's not just a sharing of some of the science, I think it's a sharing of being willing to invest in demonstration farms, which might be run together to accelerate new seed varietals being able to be developed, and then through the CGIAR links into agriculture to work with extension to get them out. Something which we are thinking about very clearly in a number of settings and have had experience with, particularly in relation to potato and soon with regard to chickpea. But that's not enough. We know that the big stumbling block at that point remains the movement towards processing and addressing post-harvest loss. And that's certainly an area where the private sector brings enormous expertise, both in being able to think about how might we accelerate development of microprocessing closer to the farmer, both to reduce post-harvest loss as well as better warehousing. And then finally, I would say the area of consumer insights, which sounds strange at the very end of the value chain, where we obviously have enormous expertise in what drives the behavior of people in terms of what they consume. We need to apply that knowledge in terms of motivating farmers to be actually looking beyond just price in terms of diversifying the quality of the crops that they grow.
Thank you. So your list would be basically productivity improvements, demonstration farms, new seeds, and looking at behavior, and particularly consumption behavior, that this could be areas that you could add value to. Okay, thank you. Ngongo. I'm massacred. Well, do it from there if you're comfortable. Okay. Is that a good list? AGRA's been in the business of African agricultural development now for a respectable length of time. Is this a good list we're building to actually make this transition out of thinking that more food or growth will be enough? Or do we need more, and what's AGRA going to do about it? This is your 5 minutes.
I hope you did not take part of my 5 minutes. Okay, good. Certainly for Africa, for most of the countries of Africa, really the first critical problem is production. You have to increase the production of food in Africa, food first, for people to have a sufficient intake. I mean, if you're having 25% of your food imported from outside of the continent, and some of the countries much more than 25%, clearly the first area to attack hunger will be, or hunger and malnutrition, will be through enough food intake. But clearly also we have to take into consideration that most Africans are in agriculture. Therefore, there's a chance to influence consumption habits by influencing production, by diversifying production into crops that are slightly, which are at least have better nutritional status. If you could attack that problem at the farmers level, then you will be able to resolve a lot of the malnutrition going on in Africa. The third point is that there's no real focus on nutrition per se. Nutrition is the natural bridge, let me say, between agriculture and health. If you had nutrition programs that worked, you would be able to build that linkage. So we are having lots of nutritional problems in Africa because the nutrition is an orphan. Agriculture has structured ministries, health has structured ministries, but nutrition is somewhere in between, lost. And many resolutions have been adopted previously in the FAO conferences to have national nutrition commissions, which so far are very far in between. And wherever they exist, they don't really work. So that will need to be done. I think maybe in some countries, governments have made a lot of effort. I should say President Kufuor in this country, he brought Ghana to the point being, as of today, the only African country that is likely to meet the Millennium Development Goal #1. Okay. So really, some countries can do it. But it means that other countries should put a lot more effort into that. The third or the fourth point that I will say is that all of this is not just technical. I mean, AGRA started more as a wholly technical organization with good improved seeds and soil fertility and the rest. But farming at the farmer's level and at the consumption level really is a community affair. Therefore, you do need the community change agents. I think Dr. Swaminathan in his statement said what India is going to do in its food security program in India, to have agents at community level to be able to bring this, all this technical knowledge, package it in the ways in which people can use the knowledge in changing crops, changing productivity habits, changing storage facilities. I would say the last point in Africa is that we are still basically handling basic raw commodities. There are no handling, no processing, no transformation. Whereas the transformation of basic food crops will provide an opportunity for enhancement, even adding say vitamins or mineral supplements, which will be a much better way of reaching people, especially those who buy food from the market. So I would say there are many opportunities to bring about these linkages and leverage them, but it cannot just be left haphazardly. Governments have to restructure themselves a little bit more to give much more emphasis on the linkage, either through agriculture or through health, and ideally through these national commissions for nutrition.
Thank you. One of the things you didn't mention, and I appreciate in 5 minutes you can't mention everything, but I was fascinated by the fact that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and John Kufuor both talked about marketing and pricing mechanisms. And President Kufuor said, we raised the price of cocoa, and guess what? They produced a lot more cocoa. This is an equation which is not terribly difficult to follow. And yet, paying farmers enough is something that doesn't happen in enough countries, and in the other countries, they usually pay them too much. So are you in AGRA trying to work on that? And I'm going to throw this back also at Carlos Perez de Cuellar, because one of the reasons for putting the CG centers together was to try and give them a bigger policy voice. Is part of that policy voice talking about the need to remunerate farmers more, so that, I mean, your first issue here is yield. Increase production, increase yield. How do you do that if you're not paying farmers sufficiently?
Good. Well, AGRA also has a small policy program to be able to interact through national governments, and especially working with farmers' organizations to increase their bargaining capacity. Because if the farmers don't have a good bargaining capacity, it's very difficult for them to access good markets. To also work with smallholder farmers, especially partnering with the World Food Program in the Purchase for Progress program that they have, through what we call warehouse receipt systems, to be able to have small stores which are closer to farming communities, so that you can create centers of aggregation. Because farmers, individual smallholder farmers in Africa, produce less than half a ton of surplus food that they could sell, probably even much less than that. So you have to bring several farmers together to be able to have quantities that attract the buyers, and to be able to introduce notions of quality and grading, so you can have even much more attractive prices. Clearly, if farmers are not well paid, they will not be able to produce more. But a lot of people are still at the subsistence level, and we need to bring them above the subsistence level into the market system. Yeah.
Carlos, are you going to do some more on this?
Yeah, just
go back to your WHO days.
Two comments on the marketing that has been mentioned by the Prime Minister. I think it is an essential ingredient to incorporate into all this research, because you cannot envisage from an economic or from an environmental point of view countries being self-sufficient in all commodities, and therefore you need to develop markets so that there can be an exchange, in particularly of perishable goods from one places to the others. On the question of remunerative prices, while I know that the emphasis has been placed when we talk about food security, about the reduction in prices that will allow consumers to have better access to foods, I think that in our thinking we should always keep in mind that unless the farmers are getting a remuneration for their crops, they will not do any investment on it. So we have two coins of the same, of different aspects that we have to look into it.
And you're going to become an advocate for that, but for both sides at the same time.
Well, I think that we cannot ignore the fact that in order to be able to meet the demands of a 9 billion population in 2050, you need to grow more. And in order to grow more, you have to give incentive to farmers to go into production. Otherwise, this is a self-defeating exercise.
William Garvelink, USAID has never been shy about saying that they thought that effective remuneration was part of agricultural solutions. Is this part of your new Feed the Future? And do you want to spend 5 minutes telling us about how this is going to make a real difference?
I think there's been a lot of initiatives that have been undertaken related to agriculture and other sorts of things. And I guess your question is, why is this a little bit different than anything else that has come on before? And I guess I'd make a few points about that, because I think the Feed the Future initiative that's being implemented by the United States government now is different than the agricultural initiatives that have been undertaken before, and there's a number of reasons for that. One, it's a different combination of activities. If you boil Feed the Future down to its basics, the way we're describing it, it's focused on smallholder agriculture. By definition, it's a gender issue as well, in the relationship between men and women and how they work together as you move from smallholder agriculture to non-farm employment, and as you work through the value chain. The third element is the one, a big one we're talking about here, is nutrition, because if you want efficient and effective farmers, they're women, and they have to take care of their women and children. They're much more susceptible to disease and other sorts of things if they're not properly, they don't have proper nutrition. So those are three key elements of this initiative. And then you add research to it, because we all know it's going to be tougher to grow food in the future to meet the 9 billion population number. So you have to do research, you have to look at new cropping systems, you have to look at drought-resistant crops. And if you're going to work, the other element for Feed the Future is the long-term one, and that's the private sector. Hopefully, if we do our job right in AID, we work ourselves out of the business like other donors, and it's the private sector that sustains this initiative. And so when you're looking at research, one element is the kind of training that goes on, and I think in the past, the kind of training that has been done has focused on working with governments and other international institutions. I think we have to refocus our training a bit to work with the private sector, and that's safety issues and other sorts of issues. If you're going to eventually export your crops, you've got a different set of issues that become very important to compete in the international markets. So if you put all of those things together, I don't think there's been, at least within USAID, an initiative that combines all of these elements and tries to build on each other and work them as one initiative. And then in addition to that, what we're doing, again, in the U.S. government, is this is a whole of government activity. So we're trying to mobilize every U.S. government agency that has something to offer to this initiative to work together with research and with the private sector and the universities. We're working very closely with the Department of Agriculture. We're working with the Peace Corps, the multi-donor trust fund that has been set up by the World Bank. We're working very closely with the Treasury Department, that is our representative there. We're working very closely with the State Department to encourage governments to have a more enabling environment for agriculture and the whole food security initiative. And even with the Peace Corps, and now much more closely with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and we're starting to talk to the U.S. Trade Representative, OPIC, and the Export-Import Bank. Each of these agencies has a little bit to offer to this initiative, and I don't think within the U.S. government, again, we've ever made an effort to pull all of that together at one time. And then another element is working with the entire value chain. I think a lot of the agriculture that has gone in the past in the U.S. government has been much more focused on agricultural production, and it's got to be a broader focus than that. So that's what we're doing. And then the last little, not insequential, insignificant element is there's resources. If you look at AID, 25 years ago, a quarter of its budget went to agricultural-related activities. In 2008, it was 1%. So with this initiative of roughly $1 billion a year, we have real resources to play with. And President Obama did this as a 3-year initiative, and we all know if we're going to do this for 3 years, we're wasting our time and money. The administrator of AID took it one step further, and as of November, created a Bureau for Food Security. So this is a permanent part of USAID's priorities now. And all of us who know bureaucracies, once you create one, it's very hard to get rid of it. So we have this bureau, and it's here to stay. And so this is a long-term commitment to this issue, not a short-term 3-year initiative thing. So you put that together, and it's a different kind of initiative that I think that will work.